Okay, hey guys, we're in the live right now. Sorry for that little mishap last week. It was really awful because Miss Countryman was in the video too, and it was such a cute video. I loved it so much. And then she started saying all the alphabet stuff, and it was really cute.
So we're in a library right now, and everyone's taking a test, but we're gonna cater to your push needs.
Section 1: The Rise of Dictatorships. The Versailles Treaty required that Germany would dismantle a lot of their military, pay for damages, and agree not to have their military in Rhineland, which was the border region of France and Germany, and give up parts of their territories.
Mm-hmm. And then
Greer was making fun of me when I said this, and she's like, "It's totalitarian," or whatever the fuck. Totalitarian is a type of government that controls all aspects of citizens' lives. Germany and Italy became totalitarian after all like the World War I stuff, and then they became like a depression stuff, and then they just stopped being democratic.
Dictatorships states were states in which they wanted to have control over the hearts and lives of other citizens, and these were the heads of totalitarian states, and the head of them were dictators, and they believed in strong military, strong nationalism, and tortellini expansion, and and citizens have little to no individual rights / freedoms.
Okay. Benito Mussolini was an Italian dictator, and he founded Italy's fascist parties.
Fascist.
Comment down below. You're so stupid. Okay, and he used like the dissatisfaction over the Treaty of Versailles to gain power. And Vladimir Lenin was the leader of the Russian Revolution and set up communist governments in the Russian Empire, and he took over. And
Joseph Stalin was a Soviet dictator. He killed 8 to 10 million people for opposing communist policies, and this led to the Soviet Union through World War I and Cold War. So it's kind of led to what is like communism today.
Yum yum. And Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Nazi Germany, one of the most infamous dictators.
And not for a good way. Well, that's what infamous, yeah. Primarily, he was responsible for the Holocaust, which we will discuss later, but this is a very important event that everyone needs to know about.
Benefit? Did you say benefit?
I said event. This is a very important event that everyone needs to know
benefit. I was like, yo, chill.
No.
Okay, Japan. So Japan wanted control of Manchuria because of the bad economy in Japan. Japan already had a section of it, but they wanted full control of it because it had a lot of raw resources such as iron. And the Axis powers was an ally between 3 countries: Germany, Japan, and Italy. U.S. people in the war.
So after World War I, a lot of Americans didn't want to be involved in foreign affairs, which is why they took over isolationism, which is the feeling of being isolated, which is why our government didn't want to involve themselves in any foreign policies, and they tried their best to do that by the Neutrality Act of 1935, which made it illegal for American businesses to sell arms to any country at the war.
And the cash and carry policy. This was a policy where foreign countries buying from America had to send their own ships to collect the goods and pay for it in cash, not credit.
And then Section 2, World War II begins. So European leaders were lenient in regards to Hitler in order to avoid war, meaning they were like, oh, it's okay, whatever you're doing is fine, we just really don't want a war right now.
Yeah, because he
started to take over,
violated a lot of stuff like the Treaty of Versailles.
He started to annex different countries that were not his to begin with.
Yeah, he wanted Austria and Czechoslovakia, and he took over a region of Czechoslovakia, which was Sudetenland, and he thought that this would provide Germany with food and soldiers, and he annexed Austria without any violence, and as we talked about in the previous slide, he took over Sudetenland.
This also helped complete Anne's
and we don't know what that is, but it's
unification.
Ooh, we're so insane.
Pretty much the region that belonged to Germany before the war, World II, was Sudetenland, and most of the population spoke German there, which is why it was so easy for him to take it over.
Yeah.
Hitler's still being awful.
So we just called out a teacher for talking, and the teacher's on a phone. Oh my god, and she said that really, really loud. Oh god. So weird.
The Munich conference was when France France, Great Britain, Italy, and Germany met in Munich, Germany, and they sought to appease Nazi Germany, which is a policy of giving in to someone's demands in order to keep the peace. And the start of World War I.
So pretty much Hitler went into in Polish quarter, which is part of Poland that was taken from Germany at the Treaty of Versailles. Anyways, because it split
Versailles.
German East, Prussia for the rest of Germany.
And Hitler signed a peace treaty with communist Russia, which was really surprising to everybody because they were the arch nemesis of Nazis. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, World War I began.
And so then Germany's attack. So this led to Blitzkrieg, which is a type of lightning-quick warfare Germany used to take over Europe. So France and Great Britain declared war on Germany 2 days after German invasion of Poland. And after the conquering of Poland, Hitler turned west and he conquered France.
Yum, yum. Okay, the Battle of Britain. This was an air battle between Germany and Britain from 1940 to 1941, when the British RAF defeated Hitler's Air Force. And Winston Churchill, he was the British war hero / Prime Minister during World War I of Britain, of course, and his leadership led British through really hard war times. This loss in battle of Germany prevented Hitler from...
So the Revised Neutrality Act. This is a new act which allowed warring countries to buy arms from U.S. businesses with cash and carry policies, and this was pretty much going against the Neutrality Act of 1935 because...
Well, it wasn't a new act, it was actually just a revision to the original act, and so this was a difference because, like,
it's obviously revised.
Well,
yeah.
The revision because it was revised. No, it was because the original Neutrality Act just banned out all businesses banned all countries from buying arms.
Yes. And then FDR agreed to sell old American destroyers in exchange for the U.S. building bases on British-controlled areas with Churchill. That's just a fact. Cool. And then the America's First Committee. So this stressed isolationism formed after FDR's destroyer deal with Britain, and this formed President Henry Hoover and Herbert Hoover, you mean? Former President Herbert Hoover.
I'm literally so stupid. Okay.
And Charles Lindbergh were in it. Okay, so FDR, it's true.
It's
FDR was still running and Hitler was still killing people because that's what he did. He's an awful person. Anyway, so FDR decided to run for a third term because he thought that a change in leadership would be helpful with the hard times
Wouldn't be helpful during the
hard times during the war, which is true because obviously, like, in the middle of the war, people are like, they can't think about having a new president. But anyway, so another thing is that the Lend-Lease Act. This was the law that allowed us to send weapons to Great Britain if Britain promised to return / pay for rent for them after the war. So pretty much, like, you'd have to, like, pay for them after.
Yeah, in June 1941, Hitler violated the Nazis' Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, and this started a massive invasion of Russia.
Which is not a good thing.
Yeah, and some other East Asia stuff and bombs. Okay, so as we talked about earlier, Japan wanted Manchuria, but they also wanted Indochina because Indochina had oil. Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was an appeal to East Asian states to rid themselves of European rule and become an Asian empire. That was supposed to be said with both, but, like, it says when Japan, like, refused to pull out of East Asia, U.S. placed an oil embargo on Japan and then froze all the assets. And so this was really bad because Japan needed oil, and then this was when U.S. started going into war with them because of Pearl Harbor. So Japan,
and this is a big deal.
Yeah, so Japan attacked U.S. They bombed it, and
they bombed ships, specifically ships.
Yeah, and so this led the Congress to declare war on Japan. And this was on December 7th, 1941, and FDR clearly stated that this was a date which will live in infamy.
And pretty much this is, like, since 2,400 people died, this was the biggest, like, U.S. loss since, obviously, like, not including the Civil War, the biggest U.S. like, attack from a different, like, country or because of whatever reasons until 9/11. That's pretty much, because then, obviously, 9/11 was another very unfortunate day where we lost a lot of people, too.
Yeah, and this was the first attack on U.S. soil since the War of 1812.
So it's been a while. It's been like 100
years.
131. Just,
Nope,
I can't.
no, that's not math. And FDR, he was the president of the United States for a lot of World War One. It says World War Three. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
What a dude.
And he was the commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War One, and he was a person that oversaw Operation Overlord or D-Day. And Harry S. Truman, he was the president of the United States that took over after the following death of FDR in 1945, and he made the decision to drop an atomic bomb on Japan, which was kind of, yeah. And George Patton, outspoken American general that played a huge part in the U.S. victories in Italy / North Africa in World War One, World War Two.
World War One.
You know me. What?
Okay, some more cool people include Omar Bradley, which was the U.S. general during World War II, who played a key part as commander of the American forces in North Africa, Italy, and France. And Douglas MacArthur, this is the U.S. general who played a prominent role in the Pacific Theater during World War II, and then this is his famous phrase, he said, "I shall return," which we'll discuss later. Okay, so section 4, mobilizing the war.
So the cost-plus system was where a company would be paid more if it made more product and the faster it worked. And so this was obviously was in effect during the World War II. And the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, RFC, the government agency that made loans to companies to help them cover the cost of converting to work production. And a lot of factories during the war made goods turned into factories that made military equipment. Liberty ships, they were cheap, easy to build, hard to sink cargo ships that were in use during the war, and they were welded, not riveted. And the war production. Others. I know, Jesus Christ. Okay, the War Production Board, the War Production Board, WPB had authority to set priorities and production goals and control the distribution of raw materials / supplies.
Okay, and the people in the war. So Selective Service and Training Act. This was a plan for the first peacetime draft in U.S. history. So GI was the nickname for American soldiers during World War II, and there was segregation during the war as whites didn't train with the black people. Black people had separate military units, facilities, etc., etc., and whites didn't want to fight next to black people, so there's still segregation even at a time like the war. In a world war, people were still worrying about if white and black, whatever. And then so a lot of African Americans didn't support the war effort because of the segregation. There was lynching and there was no voting rights. And so the Depression. So FDR, a woke queen, he's tried to stop racism. He ordered military to begin recruiting African Americans and to put them into combat.
And he also appointed Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, which was the highest ranking black officer in the U.S. Army, to range Brigadier General and the Tuskegee Airmen. This played an important role in fighting in Europe, and women in the Army set up the Women's Army Corps, WAC, Coast Guard, Navy, and the Marines set up their own women's organizations. And because women weren't allowed to fight until 1990, thousands of women served as nurses in the Army and Navy. So. Section 5, Early Battles.
So because of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan easily took over the Philippines. The American commander, as we talked about earlier, in the Philippines was Douglas S. MacArthur, who said, "I shall return." That was his famous phrase. And pretty much the bombing attack on Tokyo by the Americans was called the Doolittle Raid. And because of this, then the attack of Midway attempted to destroy the U.S. naval fleet, which is known as the Battle of Midway. And then
the attack of Midway was the Battle of Midway. Okay, yeah. Charles A. Mintz?
Yes, he was the commander of this.
Yeah, and the convoy system was a group of sailing ships for protection. And mistakes
were made on the Germany side. This was because they decided...
A lot of mistakes were made on the Germany side.
The biggest one was when they tried to invade the Soviet Union, and this led to the Battle of Stalingrad. Which pretty much was one of the turning points of World War II.
Yeah, and Section 6, Life on the Home Front. The Great Depression was ended by World War II, and women and black people were
getting more job opportunities throughout this, like we talked about.
Yeah, and this also changed American attitudes about women in the workplace.
The Fair Employment Practices, this was to enforce, these are just programs that Roosevelt set up. This is to enforce order, and this was the first civil rights agency agencies to be set up by the federal government since Reconstruction days. And then another big one is the Mercado program in 1942, and this is when the federal government arranged for Mexican farm workers to help in the harvest. And another big deal that happened, like as we were talking about with women in the workplace, was Rosie the Riveter, which was the image shown, and that's pretty much when the We Can Do It, like they were trying to attract more jobs. And some more terms you need to know is that the Sun Belt region was formed in the Sun Belt.
This is the first photo we've used on the actual PowerPoint
Ever, I know. And this is the first, so the Sun Belt region was, this was the lead region in which manufacturing and urbanization was used, and this was Southern California and the cities in the Deep South. And then another term that you might want to know is the Great Migration, which is resumed after the war.
Okay, Japanese Americans. So they were discriminated because, they were Japanese and people didn't like the Japanese. Yeah, and so they attacked their homes. Newspapers printed rumors about them that were like really mean and bad, and they were removed.
Mm-hmm. And they were also sent to internment camps, which were pretty much the camps in which there were barbed wires guarding them, and they were like treated like prisoners, and they were constantly guarded, and this is when their rights as U.S. citizens were taken away, and this is where they thought they could send them in order to avoid like any like harm within the U.S. citizens or whatever.
Yeah, and Korematsu versus United States.
And pretty much this is the case in which like a Japanese guy was like, this isn't constitutional to send us all to these camps, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that relocation was constitutional because it was based on military urgency, not race. And so these are more factors that were involved in this. There was rationing, which is where they had to create victory gardens, regulated wages, which is where they created the Office of Price Administration, which is where like they obviously regulated wages and prices to keep them low. And then they had the scrap drives, which is pretty much when the government was begging for like materials like rubber, tin, aluminum, steel. These were all issues on the homefront side, which led to war bonds.
And these were the war bonds, which were short-term loans that financed the war. Yeah, Section 7, Allies invaded Europe. Dwight D. Eisenhower, as we talked about before, was leader of the Allied forces, and the code name for the invasion led by him was Operation Overlord, as we talked about.
Yeah, and this is pretty much
D-Day.
Yeah. Oh, this is a big deal that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and this was the most massive invasion in history on June 6, 1944.
Which pretty much the Allies sent in hundreds of ships and thousands of men in just the first 3 days of the attack. And this is pretty much when the 5 beaches, Omaha, Sword, Utah, Gold, and June were all attacked. And then with the Allied invasion, Germany was fighting a two-front war, which means that there were two sides. Like Russia, I believe, was coming at them from the eastern or western side, and then I think who else was, and like France was coming from like one side. So pretty much just like when two people are like surrounding you, they were surrounded. So then on May 7th of 1945, Germany surrendered because the last battle was the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah. Okay, Section 8, the war ends. So there was a lot of island hopping, which was recapturing strategic islands and passing others. And FDR died. And this led Vice President Harry S. Truman in charge. And
the American program to build the atomic bomb was called the Manhattan Project as like a code word. And pretty much this is when one of the world's like top physicists suggested that the splitting of the atom could release enormous amounts of energy. And pretty much on August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, and this is when, like, this is obviously a debatable topic, and so then the International Peacekeeping Organization was made and was called the United Nations.
Well, this was like a continuation of this was a continuation of the League of Nations.
Yeah.
Kind of.
So, the U.S. actually got involved in this one.
Yeah. Rude. And the Section 9, the Holocaust. So, genocide is the deliberate planned killing of an entire race or group of people. And the Holocaust was a catastrophe which included genocide of Jewish people. And this occurred during World War II, when Adolf Hitler put 6 million Jewish people and millions of others to death while... Yeah.
And so then the laws that were passed were called the Nuremberg laws, and this pretty much took citizenship away from the Jewish Germans, and this banned marriage between Jews and other Germans, and then another law that defined a Jew as a person with at least one Jewish grandparent. This law also did not allow Jews to hold public office or vote, and pretty much passports for Jews were marked with a red J to clearly identify them as Jewish, and this is pretty much how the Jewish, the Holocaust started to begin. Yeah, and the Kristallnacht
This was the night on November 9th, 1939, where thousands of Jewish homes were ransacked and businesses were destroyed.
And this is also known as the Night of Broken Glass.
Yeah. So crystal knocking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So more info. So Albert Einstein was a famous Jewish person who escaped from.
No, he just escaped Germany in time,
Yeah.
while Anne Frank was another Jewish person. Yeah. So Albert Einstein was a famous Jewish person who ended up escaping in time, while Anne Frank was a Jewish person, Jewish girl to be specific, who did not escape. Their diary was published, which is like known as the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And the Wanna See Conference. This is when on January 20th, 1942, Nazi leaders met there to determine the final solution, quote
to
unquote.
the Jewish question.
To the
Pretty much,
Jewish question.
Wannsee was a suburb of the capital city of Berlin, and the Nazis made plans to round up the Jews from vast areas of Europe controlled by the Nazis, and they finally decided to take them to camps known as concentration camps. And one of the most
one of the most infamous concentration camps was Auschwitz, and there was obviously concentration camp, and this was because this caused a lot of death.
I don't know why it says German death. Just ignore that. It's Jewish death, obviously.
Yeah.
And this was like an extermination camp because people were gassing the people. And pretty much the reasons behind all this, so I'm just going to list all of them off. The reasons why people allowed the Holocaust to happen were Germany's bitterness towards the Treaty of Versailles. Germans often looked for a group to blame, so they blamed the Germans. Then people were eager to believe Adolf Hitler. And then Germany did not have a traditional government.
Such as democracy.
And people feared the German police, the Nazis, or the Gestapo, and the history of anti-Jew discrimination was already in the past, so therefore it made the Holocaust even easier to come about, which is very unfortunate, but that's history.
Yeah, it's really sad. And that's the end. I didn't make it an ending page because we're really stupid. There's
Everyone's
a star. There's a little star. I'll zoom in on that.
Come in next week for another video.
Really badly done video because this one we did all today.
And thank you. Bye.
Okay, we'll make a quality one next week.
Time.
Not next week, but like 2 weeks.
But you know what? Quality over information.
That does not make any sense.
I was gonna make a really big. You don't need the jewels and the sparkles within the PowerPoint as long as the raw information of the knowledge is there. Therefore, you can unlock your true potential within an 8-push video. Good night.
Stop! You're so bad at that. Okay.